Now, first I want to thank the organizer for having me here. It's a wonderful place and very inspiring. I never thought that I'd come to Eleusis, but I read a lot about it in the past. And it was also one of my motivations to study psychedelics. Now, I have a hard job to bring you through the history and the state of the art of psychedelic research. And I took out some highlights that are mostly related to healthy subjects and not to patients. That comes in the end, to show you it's much more difficult to convince the regulatory offices and agencies to work with these drugs worldwide. In Switzerland, we have a special opening, so we are prepared. If you see something moving, I don't know whether you see that, then it's illusion. And these drugs are banned because they were called hallucinogens. They were not called psychedelics. So they produce hallucinations, also rarely at high doses, and therefore they may be dangerous. So how is this illusion related to reality? Now, if you don't believe me, look at this Canisa figure, which we use to study the brain. How is that constructed in the different regions that are responsible for visual processing? Now, if you look at this, we just turn it around, and you see a triangle. There's no triangle. This is a very typical, very simple, elementary illusion, which you experience the whole time when you go around these areas here. So you're constantly confronted with these kind of things. Now, psychedelics are known because they do so much on the visual system. There's all kind of patterns of elementary geometric figures going through space and time, very illuminated. That's what people mostly say, oh, hallucinogens are so beautiful. But this is not the core experience. Then you can go kind through tunnels. These are pictures that people do after they had tripped in our lab. And on the right side, you see a scenery hallucination. He experienced dying, rebirth, death, becoming a flower, according to Chinese myth. And this is what is the deeper thing about psychedelics, that you get confronted with birth and rebirth and eternity and a deeper touch with the ground of reality. So we can certainly localize this is a so-called easy problem in neuroscience because it's visual processing. The hard problem is, where does consciousness come from? So how does it emerge through evolution? So these are two things. Today we speak a lot about the easy problems. Psychedelics have inspired, like Dali, Aldous Huxley, the Beatles, and a lot of pop culture, certainly. So that's the outflow of these visual alterations. Now, psychedelic research started in 1943, as we have heard already, when Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. And it was used as a tool to study the mind because at that time nobody had spoken about neurotransmitters. These are the molecules that go between nerves and inform one nerve cell to the other through chemical transmission. Then Hoffman also discovered psilocybin with Maria Sabina in Mexico, isolated it and brought it back, and it came on the market. It was marketed worldwide as a real tool in psychotherapy. Then at our university, Dietrich was interested, what are the common dimensions of psychedelics, meditation, sensory deprivation, samadhi tank, floating tank, and all these things, and came out with rating scales. Now, in 1992, I set up the Hefter Center in Zurich. It's an arm, a branch of an American center, because in the US, they were not allowed to do any studies. We brought all these studies to Switzerland. In 1998, we showed the first time that one important receptor site is responsible for starting the psychedelic experience. It's a serotonin 2A receptor. We also had in Switzerland a society since the 90s, the Swiss Society for Psychological Therapy. They can use psychedelics since the 50s if a patient does not respond to at least 2 treatments. That can be psychotherapy or conventional pharmacology. So these guys goes on and they treat about 1,000 patients per year. So we have a lot of insight also from the clinical side what's going on with psychedelics. Then the receptor has been isolated, and in 2016 the hype started, with Conrad Harris in England and so on. And then jumping over to Johns Hopkins in New York, where studies started again in the US. Now very new is the finding, which we follow deeply in mice, not in humans, that one single dose of psychedelics can alter the network configurations, can enhance the synaptogenesis and open up patterns you are rigid, close to, and open the space. And now it's the question, how long is that opening? Psychedelics, as we have heard, are mostly out of plants. Well-known peyote was used by South American, North American Indians, ayahuasca also mostly in South America, and we heard about his church. This church is the Santo Divine Church in the US, which is accepted that indigenous people in the US can use ayahuasca. Then psilocybin, then we have this nice flower here, which we may have in your garden, and you have grasses around Eleusis. And that was the interesting finding, that on certain wild grass there is a fungi and produces ergine, which is very similar to the semisynthetic LSD. It's an LSD derivative that Hoffman discovered. So the cult around Eleusis was not a religion. It was, in essence, a transformative experience revealing insights into life, death, and rebirth. And what we know is mostly from initiatives, and there is a lot to read if you go through the literature. And one statement from Plato I was really impressed was, reality is created by the mind. We can change the mind, and thus, therefore, reality. Now, Hoffman showed that on this wild grass around Eleusis, Paspalum distichum, this ergot derivative is on. Whether this was the real solution of the mystery, which was kept very secret, we don't know yet, but it's at least to some extent psychoactive. Now, what are psychedelics doing? They open up the mental space or consciousness in 4 dimensions. One we went through is vision, the other is emotion, it activates emotion, recalls memory from the past, then it lowers rational cognition, and it improves social cognition. That, I would say, is the core. And all these changes come along with a slowly dissolution of your self-boundaries. Now we see that in deep meditation, without drugs, spontaneously, in mystics, or with body engagement, this Sufi dancing. You don't need to take drugs to go into this space. So what is important? Dose is the most important limitation. If you have a too high dose, your brain becomes unstable. For psilocybin, it's about 20 milligrams to 25. But the setting we already heard is important. And here, how you regulate emotion. Are you a suppressor, or you can reappraisal your ideas? How is your cognition? Are you rigid? Are you closed? Are you open to new experiences? So these are personality factors which we found in all our volunteers, which I do not go deeper in here. In the clinical setting, it's the interaction with the therapist is very important, and so you have to build trust, and therefore people are seen 3 times, then they have the drug session, and then comes the big work, the integration session, which can take 2 months, 1 month. There's no rules, but in Switzerland it mostly takes 1 to 2 months. And what I have to say, to have success in depression, at least they have to come back 3 times. This idea that 1 shot or 2 drug sessions lead to a deeper transformation is an illusion. So it's much more complex. What is important is the quality of the experience is important for the change, and other things like the recall of emotions. So if it has repeatedly shown that depression goes down with this kind of spiritual or mystical experience without space and time, loss of ego boundaries, but this measure includes also this emotional activation and this shift in emotions. So things are not so easy. When we give the drug, it starts with the change of the body's sense, how you sense your body. I would even say it's not an emotion, it's the feeling of existing. And that's deep down in the brainstem. It don't need a cortex, which is higher order level. Affects are intermediate, and cognition is also cortical work seen from brain science. So we have this cascade: emotion, affect, activation, cognition comes down, less reduce your kind of thinking, and open up the space for connecting with the environment. Now, this is not just a joke. Here, just one slide that when we flash people with different emotions, happy, neutral, fearful faces, just for 10 milliseconds, they don't see it, but the brain sees it. It reacts, and that you can see that fearful faces, don't know whether this works, here around get reduced. And if you're conscious, if you see the picture, your consciousness is even more important. So that is the first time we could show that conscious attention has an impact on a neural system, because most of neuroscientists will say, no, you are completely dependent on physical laws and you cannot interfere with the material world. So this is this interface. So what we want to see is this oceanic boundlessness that is transformative, and the opposite with high doses we call dread of ego dissolution or anxious ego dissolution. Now, how can we do that? We can look at the receptor side, how many of the drug is at the receptor. We can look at networks. We can rate the people, what they experience. We always have to ask them, because in the physical measures, we have no answer what they experience. And therefore, we try to operationalize emotion processing, visual processing, or cognitive processing on a neuroscience level. So here, as an example, these brain areas get activated and people are much more connected with the environment. The more this receptor site, this 2A receptor, is occupied, the more they feel connected to the environment. Now, our sense of being is deeply embodied in our body. If you ask people, who are you, they make like this, and so blah, blah, blah. And even without the cortex, the sense of your body goes down to very archaic evolutionary structures. This was an experiment with artists. They should, draw their physical, how they feel, and during the trip they come back. You see that the body is dissoluted. Can we look at this from neuroscience point of view? Yes, we can. Your brain is constantly modeling reality. So what you experience now is a construct of your expectation. We call that bias, coming from your memory. And if something deviates from that, what you you think you will experience automatically, we call it deviant. That induces in the brain, over different hierarchies, a prediction error. For instance, if you listen to music, let's say Beethoven's Fifth, you hear da 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 da, next time da 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 dee, you get surprised. This is a deviant, and the brain is exactly taking that out. And if we stimulate the body during the trip, people exactly have that feeling that they do not predict anymore their body scheme, and that nicely relates the feeling of unity. So we have external measures to approach apart is just the body self. It's not the social self. There are so many selves. What we see, it's very hierarchic. So psychedelics at a high top level of processing, of constructing reality, they make it loose. And that is very important for learning. So this is the first study that shows that. It's just under revision, that psychedelic really change the rigidity of cognitive patterns. So what we also do, social interaction, because psychedelics have been said to make you open for other people. Is that so? Yes, we let people play in the scanner, two people with an avatar, and sometimes they have to wait, they get excluded, and then the brain makes a pain signal. You see that on the right side. You don't like it not to be involved in this gameplay. And psychedelics, on the one hand, enhance your emotional level to be more positive and reduce that pain signal, and on the same time, enhance empathy. That's interesting. So you have more insight in another person, this emotional. You have more the feeling how the other feels. He's playing now, I have to wait. It's not such a tragedy. So it's just another example how we try to do that. Now, what is the outcome of these studies? In normals, we see that 1 or 2 doses open up openness. That's a personality structure. They make them more attentive to now. If you take measures from meditation, or for instance, they make them people more altruistic. That's facts from a number of studies we can demonstrate. Now, I want to go back to this climbing up the psychedelic experience. When I said that you have a recall of emotions, it can be good and bad. Normal people who are strong in their ego synthesis, they can deal with that. They have a certain distance to their experience and can reflect it. And then it goes up and thinking becomes more loose, unconstrained. That can also be something people get overwhelmed. So difficulty in concentrating, and then you can become anxious. So there's a good trip and there's a bad trip. How can we manipulate that? And one thing we have studied was, look how the Buddhists are doing this. The Buddhists are they're trained in keeping attention very strong over years. They just focus, for instance, of a candle, then they open up the space and start to be non-judgmental to their emotional experience and their cognitive experience. This is a highly, or should I say, this is a skill that they train for years, not to be attached to what's going on, to go in a state of emptiness, and then you go into a state of being connected with the environment or with other persons. And what's also important, the highest level in this kind of Zen meditation is self-inquiry, to become clear that reality is not permanent. That's something an untrained person will not do, but this is the breakthrough for non-duality. So these people are trained. So what have we done? We have done several retreats in Buddhistic centers in Switzerland. I was warned and was on the front page of the Boulevard Press, university is going crazy, but that's the risk if you do these things. And it was really fantastic. We scanned them before and after the retreat. We measured them every day, how deep they go in meditation, how good they can keep awareness, how open they are, and so on. And what came out was very fascinating. On the one hand, on the day 4, they were in deeper meditation than the placebo Buddhists. On the left side, you see that only 3 persons on the top were deep in a mystical state. Psychedelic pushed them up. And if we do that with beginners, they are not at that level. You see the orange lines, that, for instance, this oceanic boundlessness, what people want to go up to this non-duality. they do not manage that. They have more anxiety. This is AIA, and they are less focused. This is typically because they have not that training. So what we found out over many retreats, that training, acceptance, and presence in just normal people helps them to navigate through these states. And people that can reappraisal their emotion, that can change perspective, they're decentered, they have much less anxiety. So what we started is to train patients just with mindfulness training for 2 months, and then to take them into psychedelic therapy. So that's a new way of preparation. So is that lasting? Yes, what we see after 4 months in these experiments is that people become more open, they have an increased appreciation of life as the first plot, they have an increased acceptance of themselves and an increased concern for others. And this is driven, on the one hand, by the experience of positive emotion and this feeling of unity. So if you go down a little bit closer, not just speak about mystical experience, if we tease out psychometric data, then we can show that certain things are most important. So why is that important, the self? Because depressed patients are so egocentric. They spiral on their negative thoughts, on the negative body. Everything is bad. So the breakthrough in, if we take cognitive measures to approach the psychedelic therapy, not just say, yeah, they are having a very nice oceanic boundlessness floating in the space. This is not really science. So self-referential processing is altered. Here you see 2 studies, the left one we did in Zurich. We have about 50 to 60% responders. That means 40% of patients do not respond to psilocybin. You have to have a clear mind. Why do they not respond? What do they need? Is something wrong? Is this the wrong patient? But on the right side, you see the higher the dose, the better the symptom reduction. And what we also see is that psychedelics really do in patients change how they process emotion enduringly. It's not just during the psychedelic trip, it was 3 weeks later and then up to 3 months. What we also see that people become more empathic, so it's very important for social interaction. So psychedelics work through emotion processing, shifting kind of emotion. They work through improving social processing and social cognition, self-processing. How long does it last? We think in most of our study 3 to 6 months. And then what we don't know is what kind of psychotherapy is needed. All studies so far are phase 2 studies, and none of them have shown what's the impact of psychotherapy. But this is widely discussed, and the regulatory authority do not approve for psychotherapy. They only approve, and therefore it's so complex, pharmacological effects and safety. So the protocols that we heard are very strict, but they are not at where they should be. The next step of development has to be placebo, no drug, psychotherapy alone, psilocybin, and psilocybin plus psychotherapy. This is what FDA told us in a recent workshop. They do not accept a 2-arm study. They want to see 4-arm. We call that the factorial design. There are a lot of things that I cannot go into is risk. Risk in controlled setting is rare adverse effects, 5 to 6%. In our hands, in non-controlled setting is higher. That we heard also there's ethical question. Is it really legal to induce spirituality through a drug? We had this discussion in the 70s. It's nothing new. Toxicology is not yet done for microdosing. That's a really open question. And long-term dependency is another question. So all things that has to be cleared before we can think about registration. Now what you see here is so bistable rivalry figures. You see maybe a duck or a hare. The neck cube is jumping. And here you see something turning. And if you relax, maybe you found out that something is going on. I don't know whether somebody sees that. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. So everybody has his circle, his time. Everybody is sitting here in his universe. And each switching time is very different. It's not a common thing. That's how we experience reality. Now, what I want to make the point is, if you train your attention, you can influence this switching rate without drugs. You see in a very homogeneous switching time. And on the right side, you see the same thing with psychedelics. That means that engagement is very important. That's the last point. Modern neuroscience has a very new concept. We don't believe that consciousness comes out of material per se, but it's the offspring of the arrangement of material and form. It's information. And this is very abstract. It sits between things. That's a new dimension. Normally we have matter, energy, and now since the 70s, 90s, there's more and more evidence that it from bits, something exists because it's information. And psychedelics do exactly, they inform you. It's useful information. It has an inner aspect and an outer aspect. Okay, thank you very much. If you'd like to know more,